All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, remember to ask your questions. Let's go ahead and get those in. We want to make sure questions are asked and then upvote questions as people are asking. Now, it looks like we've got kind of a small group in here right now, which is totally fine. All right. So, as far as okay. Yeah, this is where we're getting into like some stuff. Emily, gosh, do you really have to start me on that? All right. So as far as that, gosh, come on, people. Like give me some this one's a tough one, okay? The commercial revolution, okay? Yeah, this is just one of those, like I'm like, oh, we've got a question. It's like, oh, it's that question. All right. But the commercial revolution is really as it's one of those, but part of it's the price revolution. Okay. So what's going on here is remember in the Middle Ages, you started to see the guilds in the Middle Ages. And so the guilds, basically controlled everything, and there was no separation between labor and capital. So if we think about this, like, Mr. Freiler in the AP Achiever text, Chris Freiler defines capitalism as basically when you separate labor and capital. This is my favorite review book here. Chris Freiler is a really smart guy and has done a lot of things. Actually, was on the committee that designed this this redesigned AP exam. And so as far as that goes, that you had the guild. So it's like, and then you've got the local blacksmith. It's like he owns his shop, he owns his tools, he does his thing. And then he's got, a guild that he goes with and that sort of thing. Now, the commercial revolution, merchants start taking a more active role, and we start to see a greater amount of like manufacturing by unskilled laborers and that sort of thing. Now, also we've got this is a really complicated topic. Okay, somebody please save me and give me a pitch over the plate at some point. But the thing is that you're dealing with all of the global trade is coming in. So all these goods are coming in, but the population is going up. So even though the goods initially got cheaper, now everybody wants them. And then there's more of a population. So prices start to go up. Okay. So there's also this price revolution at the same time. But this is one of those things I wasn't quite 100% prepared for that one. It's a tough one. And it's one of those topics that I'm just like, but hopefully that helps just a little bit. And I'm sorry I don't have like a better grasp on that particular topic. Now, what we can do here, we've got here, okay. So as far as that question from the chapter, why did Cardinal Richelieu fight against the Habsburgs and the Protestants? Now, what you're thinking about here, okay, now Cardinal Richelieu, what we've got to understand here is that Cardinal Richelieu was a politique, okay? Now, a politique is somebody who puts the country ahead of any religious group or any religious agenda. Now, Richelieu wasn't fighting against the Protestants and the Habsburgs at the same time. Now, during the French Wars of Religion, Richelieu fought against a Huguenot uprising. So there was a Huguenot uprising in France that Richelieu put down. Now, as far as the 30 Years' War, Richelieu intervened with France on the side of the Protestants. So he's fighting the Habsburgs and he's fighting on the side of the Protestants because he believed that it would be best for France if he's fighting against the Habsburgs. So just remember that Richelieu was, you could say he was a little bit of a Machiavellian figure, that the end justifies the means, that if these Protestant Huguenots within France are fighting against the French government and the French state, then he's going to fight against them. But if Protestants outside of France, so Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden is going into the Holy Roman Empire and he's fighting against the Habsburgs, then the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So France intervened in the 30 Years' War in the latter two phases on the side of the Protestants. So as far as this goes, Richelieu as a politique, Politiquue, which you could say Politicue is what one of my students said one time. Politicue, which is a written test. So if that's how you pronounce it, big deal. As long as it's a written test. So going with that, that is important just to note as far as that one. Filtered out the fake ones. What does that mean? I wish that I had a frame of reference on that. So we filtered out the fake ones. It's something I think that I'd kind of like to that I'd kind of like to use really. That just sounds like something that would be really good for somebody to put on a t-shirt or something like that. Okay, so as far as that goes, let's see. We finally filtered out the fake ones. All right, how were women's lives affected by the Reformation? Okay, so as far as that goes, now one thing we need to understand is the Renaissance was sexist. I think that's one of the most important understandings to bring out of this is the understanding that the Renaissance was sexist. Humanism, not womanism or anything like that. That basically women in the Renaissance were shut out largely from this humanistic education, that they weren't taught the classical languages. So all of these humanist writers during the Renaissance were men. All right. And so then, we get to the Reformation. We see here, first of all, that most of these Reformation groups didn't allow women to become clergy, just like the Catholics did not. But one thing is that with the whole sola scriptura thing, if the religion is to be based primarily on a book, then every Christian needs to know how to read. And so women need to be taught to read so that they can teach their children to read. And so that's something. Now, of course, with clerical marriage, that's something that's impacting women who are now married to these Protestant ministers. Now, as far as the witchcraft craze, I don't know how directly that goes in with the Reformation, but certainly the witchcraft craze is targeting women, partly because I guess they don't have a privileged place in society, but also because women tended to be midwives, and midwives were experts in herbal medicine and stuff like that. And so it'd be like, oh, how did she do that? And then we don't understand that. So the midwives would be targeted by a lot of these, about these witchcraft kind of uprisings. But the thing is that that's one of those things that, targeting women. But I would say, as far as if we're thinking about women, I think one of the things we need to note that the women are supposed to be moral authorities for their children, and also are being taught how to read so they can teach their kids how to read. But again, they're not getting opportunities to serve in the clergy or anything like that. So the Reformation is not really fundamentally changing women's roles from what they were in the Renaissance. All right. Now, as far as that, Nora, the Grand Duchy of Moscow. Okay. Now that is a principality. Okay. So the Grand Duchy of Moscow was a principality that, of course, later becomes Russia. The boyars are not the same thing. So yes or no question, no. But the boyars in the Grand Duchy of Moscow, basically the boyars are the nobility, kind of like the Junkers, or it says Junkers, like in Prussia. The Junkers, these are the nobles in Prussia, the Prussian nobility. So the boyars are to Muscovy and Russia what the Junkers are to Prussia. Okay, they are the old nobility. And of course, Peter the Great is taking on the boyars and of course, Ivan the Terrible had taken on the boyars as well. Just like Louis the 14th took on the nobility and tried to bring it in. And of course, then there's also the Fredericks of Prussia turning it into a service nobility. So the boyars are the nobility in Muscovy / later Russia. All right, ladies and gentlemen, go ahead and let's go ahead and get these in there. Okay, so Emily, the import-export of goods from the New World affecting European society. Now, first of all, the age of exploration is resulting in an influx of luxury goods. Okay, so all of these exotic luxury goods that had been very, very difficult to get beforehand. So what's happening as these luxury goods are now more plentiful and more affordable, people want to buy them. And then as they're as they're buying them, the demand's going up, and then the population of Europe's going up as well. And so with that, we start to see that this kind of what they call conspicuous consumption, that you start to see more of a consumer-based society. There's also, like, not the industrial revolution, but there's one scholar that was writing about how the Industrial Revolution was preceded by an industrious revolution. Think about this. Like, when you think about, like, all of the bills that we pay. Now, if someone was willing to live in a modest house and not have a cell phone, not have satellite TV, not drive, like, maybe they're going to ride their bike around or something like that, use public transportation, it's possible for somebody to live simply in the United States of America today. But with all of the technologies that are out there, everybody wants those technologies. We want to consume these things. We want to have these luxury goods. And so with that, you see that there is a great deal more consumption on our society, in our society, than we'd seen previously. So think about this, like when we have, like, all of these, satellite TVs, iPhones, all of those things, that people are consuming these products, and everybody is caught up in this consumer culture, which before that you really didn't have a large amount of consumer goods. Okay, so as far as that goes, okay, so we've got that one. Thank you, Emily. That was a little bit easier for me. The other one, it's one of those I've tried to rack my brain around, and it's just no luck. All right, so then y'all keep them coming, because I've thought I was going to run out of questions for a second. So if you got a question, that's why we're here. I mean, this is really like customized help from somebody who is who teaches the subject, who is here with you. All right, now, Nora, I'm wondering about this question. What did Poland do after Denmark was defeated by Sweden during Peter the Great's attack? Okay. Where are you finding this, Nora? I'm going to invite you on screen here. You may or may not want to come on screen. You may be able to get on screen just audio and not video. I'm not sure exactly how that works. But the Great Northern War was fought between Peter the Great and Sweden, and it really didn't have anything to do with Poland. Little bit confused here. Little bit confused here. All right. And Emily, you've got the look of somebody who's already graduated. What's up with that? Like, you've got a cap and gown on and all that. All right. So as far as that, I'm not exactly sure where this is going. Okay. Now, this is a great example, Nora, of what's probably going on. Are you getting this out of your main textbook? Okay, because that could be an issue. If you're getting it out of your main textbook, if you're not getting this out, like, I would bet that if you were looking at something like this, or like there's an Ethel Wood text, there are texts that are like basically being written for the exam from undergrad. Wait. Oh, Emily, you're a teacher. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Okay, all right, got it. That okay. I was thinking. I thought for a second. I was like, is she a college student trying to come in here and get some? But okay, that makes much more sense. The questions that you're asking, you were here previously, so yeah, we're good. We're good. All right. So that makes sense that you're asking more complex questions. But as far as what goes on here, Nora, I think for the purposes of AP European history, this kind of stuff here is not going to be like a major factor. What's going to be a major factor are Peter the Great's overall goals, like Westernization, warm water ports, knowing that he went to war with Sweden in the Great Northern War, and that St. Petersburg was a result of this, and he gained a warm water port out of his war with Sweden. But at the same time, it is at the same time that I wouldn't go into all of this stuff. Okay. Like, I think you're getting a little bit too deep into the weeds here, and it's going to overcomplicate things, and you're going to end up just not knowing which way is up because you were focusing on stuff that's not really going to be emphasized on the exam. That would be my take on that. All right. So as far as that, where do you usually fit in? Okay. So yeah. So this is the thing, Emily. This is, I always tell teachers that, like, teach this the way you're comfortable with it, okay? Which I tend to, like the way that I structure my units, I do the Renaissance, the Reformation, absolutism, and then the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. Now, the thing is, if you look at the concept outline, it's got the scientific revolution and key concept, like key concept one, and it's separated from the Enlightenment. Now, I've got a video on YouTube called The Scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment Compared. And so in this, I'm comparing the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, but what I would say that it's important, like I would say that the concept outline is something that you can cut up, okay? It's almost like you can cut up and you can paste it wherever you want and teach things in a way that it makes sense to you. Because if you're going in an order there, if you're teaching in somebody else's order, then it's not going to make sense to you. It's not going to make sense to your kids. But yeah, so the way that I do it, Renaissance, Reformation, Age of Absolutism, and then I go into the Scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment, before going into the French Revolution. I don't think I'm the only person that does that. I think that that's something that is, putting all that scientific stuff together in one unit, I think is great. But if there's somebody that wanted to teach the Scientific Revolution, then go into the Age of Absolutism. But personally, I feel like when people are talking about royal academies, if they haven't studied absolutism yet, then yeah, but teach, yeah, as long as everything gets taught, teach this in a way that makes sense to you. I think that is the most important thing. And so as far as that, why is Calvin? Okay, this is interesting here. Okay, so why is Calvinism so often tied with political resistance? It's appeal to the French nobility before the French religion. Okay, so as far as that goes, the issue here is that only in Switzerland and Scotland, it's hard for me not to say Scotland, but only in Switzerland and Scotland are you dealing with a situation where Calvinists are in the majority. Everywhere else, Calvinists are a minority faction. So what you're dealing with in France, which was still a heavily Catholic country, okay, so Huguenots only made up, I think, maybe about 10% of the population in France tops at any given time, okay? So with that going on, that you're dealing with a small faction, whereas in England at the same time, so you get into the Puritans and the Separatists and all of the stuff that happens there. Once again, Calvinists are a minority in that area. Now, of course, another thing, the Dutch Republic, you have a majority of Calvinists. But then again, there, of course, the Calvinists, they're not, there are some more radical factions there. You got like the Anabaptists and the Quakers and stuff like that. Of course, I don't know if I'd call the Quakers radical because they're not challenging governments or anything like that. But the Calvinists, like in the Netherlands, they had what was called the Beeldenstorm, okay, which was where the Calvinists are just basically Calvinist mobs are going into these churches and destroying all of the icons and all of the statues and all of the art. So Calvinists really, it's a very big challenge. It's not like Lutherans where it was kind of, it was. Lutherans and Anglicans, they're not really fundamental challenges to the way that things were done in Christianity. So I think that what you're dealing with the Calvinists is that they are just so far removed from what people are used to, and outside of the Netherlands and Geneva and Scotland, they never really form a majority anywhere. And so I think that's what you're dealing with, that they're typically like a faction within a larger society. Like when you look at a map of the Reformation, it'll show you, like some of the maps will show you specifically in France where there were like Calvinist communities and that sort of thing. But then again, where you go to, Geneva, or you go to the Netherlands, or you go to Scotland, it's a little bit different. And actually in the Netherlands, the Calvinists are actually leading what is actually a pretty a pretty tolerant religious culture over there. So glad that we could talk about that. Hopefully that answered your question. All right. So any importance to absolute monarchs to stress? It's really up to you. I feel like that, sometimes, like, the thing is kind of like what we were talking about with the Great Northern War, okay? That basically, having a comprehensive, um, having a comprehensive, like, all of the stuff. Now, for me, like, there may be some teachers that like to talk about like Austrian absolutism and that sort of thing. I don't tend to emphasize Austria. I don't really emphasize the Ottoman Empire that much. Pretty much with me, yeah, I look at France, I look at Prussia, Russia, and what's going on in Britain. That's pretty much all I do there. Yes. So Louis, Peter, the Fredericks, and the Stuarts, that tends to be fine for me. And especially if you've been teaching this for, only a short time, I wouldn't try to get too deep, especially with this redesigned exam, which is now kind of, at some point, we'll just call it the exam because, the redesign was some years ago now. But as far as that goes, those are the ones that I focus on. So I wouldn't see, I mean, when it comes down to it, remember that, it only takes a certain amount of answers correct for somebody to get a 5 on the exam. It's really, now, if we were talking like 20 or 30 years ago, we might be saying something else, but I don't think that making a 5, that you would necessarily have to know like a single like Austrian absolutist, maybe until you get to like the enlightened absolutist, when I will talk about like Joseph II, his role in that. But when I'm doing the absolutism unit, this is basically what I'm doing here. And I do talk about the Dutch Republic a bit, as far as just to spend one class period on the Dutch Republic. All right, so, but that's partly because I'm so fascinated with the Netherlands. All right, so the scientific revolution, specific figures and their works. Okay, so now I would I was actually just doing a tutoring session between my Fiveable broadcast. I was with tutoring session, and the student that I was talking to, I mean, there was actually, like, I think that in terms of teaching something, I think that what we have to do, okay, and this is good for everybody that to hear, because there is the teacher's role, okay, to prepare you adequately for the exam. And then if there is a student that is like very, very determined to get a 5, and they're like, or they're trying to, hey, let me see if I can make a 6 on this thing, then there are certain things that they can do on their own, okay? And I think that that is something that is important to note here, that there is a difference between, there's a difference between what we really need to teach to make sure that a student can get college credit and what they may want to know later. But, I think in terms of, off the top of my head, the scientific revolution, you're looking at, now, of course, I think the 3 ancient authorities are important. So, which Galen will not be as accessible to some people as Aristotle and Ptolemy, but like Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Galen. So it's like, where are we starting? But especially with Aristotle and Ptolemy, and then Copernicus and Galileo and Newton. Now, we could get into Kepler and Tycho Brahe and all those folks, but I don't. I think Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton, and then perhaps getting into Descartes and Francis Bacon. I think that those are good too, but it's just really a matter of a student's goals and kind of prioritizing some of these things, and seeing, and that's the thing students need to realize. You don't have to know everything, but if you can learn a handful of things really well. William Harvey is also someone who's in the concept outline, which it gets into some pretty some pretty deep medical stuff when you're getting into that. But he's somebody, in his role in, showing like the circulation of the blood and stuff like that, that's something that is, that is of great importance. All right. So but then in the Enlightenment, same thing, that I think that when it comes down to it, if somebody's got a grasp of like Voltaire and Rousseau, I think that those are the only 2 Enlightenment philosophers that are mentioned in the concept outline. So don't feel like you have to like teach everything, but I do talk about typically Voltaire, Diderot, Rousseau, Montesquieu, and Adam Smith. Maybe a little bit about Kant, but mostly as an introduction. His What is Enlightenment essay I've always used as kind of a way to explain the Enlightenment. All right. So thanks for your questions tonight, Emily. And why would Catholic priests still break their celibacy even though they knew that they were breaking holy doctrine of the Catholic Church? Charlie, I don't know if my answer to that question would necessarily be relevant to the exam. This is a very, very interesting question. Yeah, I think that I'm just going to kind of keep that one to myself. But especially, I mean, this is just yeah. Let's go ahead and that's very that's it's very very interesting question, Charlie. But I'm just going to let that one go. All right. So as far as that goes, I'm looking at no new questions, ladies and gentlemen. Do y'all want to hang around a little longer, or let's go ahead and bring some questions into this because there are I just want to make sure, like, it's getting to where people are like studying different things. So I don't want to get too heavy on the presentation side. But if there's something y'all want me to talk about, just let me know. We've got about 13 people in here. Let's go ahead and get it in there because we haven't even been going half an hour. Come on, people. All right. Oh, good. Okay, there's a question. All right, keep them coming. Keep them coming. Let's lower the bar for standards. Okay. Now, Kyle, this is another. Okay, when we start talking about stuff like the Edict of Restitution. Now, I wouldn't go too deep into that now, as far as I know, just off the top of my head. Okay, the Edict of Restitution, we need to remember is before Gustavus Adolphus got in, okay, the first two phases, the Bohemian phase and the Danish phase, that essentially the 30 Years' War starts off as a war within the Holy Roman Empire about religion. And so the Edict of Restitution is basically Ferdinand, the Holy Roman Emperor, who wants to make sure that Catholicism is, as spread out as it can, that there's as much Catholicism as possible. And so he wants to make sure that any of them that switched hands. Because remember, the Peace of Augsburg said, whoever reigns his religion. So whatever the local ruler says about religion is going to be the religion in that area. But then as some people start converting to Protestantism, then it's like, okay, this place that was Catholic is now, is now Protestant. But as far as that goes, the Edict of Restitution, from my understanding, was to try to, basically take back any Catholic lands that had fallen into Protestant hands. But I wouldn't necessarily think about something like that as, a big, like, to do. But the thing is, it's kind of the turning point of the 30 Years' War. Okay. And the context, I think, is important here, that basically the Catholics had decisive victories in the first two phases of the 30 Years' War. And that is part of, of course, that's going to end when Gustavus Adolphus landed in response. Like, what's going on is basically the Catholics won and they wanted to make the most of their victory. And Gustavus Adolphus is like, you know what? I'm going to go in there and I'm going to protect Protestants. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And so the tide really turns where, in the second two phases, the Protestants have a lot more success in the 30 Years' War. But that is largely because Gustavus Adolphus's, the foreign intervention of Gustavus Adolphus. Now, as far as the early part, it's only within the Holy Roman Empire. So the latter two phases of 30 Years' War are involving Sweden. And of course, once Sweden gets involved, then France gets involved as well on the side of Sweden. And since Cardinal Richelieu was a politique, he saw that France's interests were better served not fighting alongside the Catholic Habsburgs, but fighting alongside the Protestants who were fighting against the Habsburgs, who were France's political rivals in Europe at the time. So that whole idea of the balance of power. All right. So as far as that, now, ladies and gentlemen, I've heard from Fiveable today that these weekly broadcasts, will continue to be free through the month of October at least. I think there may be some like technical glitches that are responsible for that. They're still kind of working on some aspects of their platform, but these are going to be free throughout the month of October. But if you want to look at the archived sessions, then those are for members only. Now, remember, Fiveable is pretty cheap right now. The price is going to go up in the in the spring. So the price is going to go up in the spring, but you want to make sure that you get on this while it's there. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know we had a small group tonight, so we may cut this one a little short. But if anybody has any questions, Nora, you got questions for me? Kyle, anything else? Y'all go ahead and get me on. Okay, so well, but let's just see. Let's see. Why don't we take a look, Nora? Why don't we take a look? And why does yours say rejected on there? Um, Not sure what that means. Oh, okay. Oh, you rejected the on-screen invitation. Gotcha, gotcha. All right. So as far as that goes, let's go ahead. Yeah, Nora, give me your question. Give me a question, okay? Because sometimes it's like it's good that I was at least able to kind of let you know this is what you do need to know. So don't be shy. I mean, that's why I'm here. All right. Oh, okay. It's kind of yeah, I got that going on. But yeah, go ahead and ask me another question. All right. Or if y'all are like, hey, we're done, then I'm not going to argue with you. This is the last thing I've got to do tonight. I've been pretty busy. I haven't even eaten dinner. So if that's the thing. Now, what would y'all like to see us talk about next week? Are we studying absolutism right now? Then again, it's a little bit lower of a crowd than we've had in the past, so we'll see. Maybe something's going on with our folks in Miami or something like that. All right, Mary Queen of Scots. This would be something that is it's a okay, and this is a good question, Kyle. When we think about Mary Queen of Scots, this is a great example of something that is very like front and center in like popular history. Okay, but you need to know nothing about Mary Queen of Scots, like for the AP European History exam. I would not even put her as somebody that that I would think would have any chance at coming up. But that whole thing between Queen Elizabeth and Mary Queen of Scots, that was something that was important and it's something that's figured highly in the popular history, but not something that's going to be on that. Now, Nora, as far and y'all remember, ask your questions on the actual question thing, because that way it's people can see, they can go like in the archive, people can see when questions are answered. So I would much prefer that people are asking their questions through the Q&A rather than on the chat. But as far as Versailles, you need to understand that Louis, it is nice, but Louis built this for himself. I mean, certainly an egomaniac, but it also showcased the greatness of France. Now, one thing, though, is to know that Versailles is actually something that the expense of keeping up Versailles is going to be something that, when the French monarchy is bankrupt in the late 18th century, that's going to be an issue. Okay, that's going to be an issue. And so, as far as that goes, you need to know that, but also that Louis used Versailles in order to keep an eye on the nobility. So Louis is inviting nobles to Versailles. They're living there. They're having to stay there a good bit if they want to have favors from Louis. So there's something in the Duke de Saint-Simon's writings where the Duke de Saint-Simon is saying that, like, Louis, if there was like a nobleman who hadn't shown up at Versailles lately and that nobleman wanted a favor, Louis was like, who? I don't know that guy. He never comes to see me. And so that's kind of what happens there. So Louis, it is part of his idea to like showcase. Now, again, before Louis moved the royal court to Versailles, the royal court was in Paris. All right, so it was in Paris, and it was this royal court was in Versailles rather than Paris. So Louis was taking the monarchy away from the people and really kind of creating like a mystique around the monarchy, that it's in its own place rather than right there in the center of everything. So it separates the king from his subjects. Which is the more significant religious doctrine? Okay, the Edict of Nantes or the Edict of Fontainebleau. Now, the thing is I would say that wouldn't be the question that I would ask here. What I would ask is like basically how did each of these fit into its times? Okay, so the Edict of Nantes. What we see here is that Henry IV, who had been a Huguenot, who had just seen the country go through the French wars of religion. He is converted to Catholicism. Paris is worth a mass. But he realized that you just had this war that was fought between these two factions, the Huguenots and the Catholics. And so what Henry did was he issued the Edict of Nantes, which said that Huguenots will be tolerated in certain cities. Okay, so we're going to we're going to do that. Now, then the Edict of Fontainebleau, the context here is absolutism. Now, in the interval, there's been a Catholic resurgence. Now, Louis the 14th was Henry the Fourth's grandson, but he was a devout Catholic. And so Louis was a devout Catholic, and it was a time when the Huguenots were in a decline, that there was a Catholic resurgence on the European continent. And Louis, of course, is creating this absolutist state. And part of this absolutist state is this program of one king, one law, one faith. And so with one king, one law, one faith, Louis says that everyone is going to be Catholic. Okay, everyone is going to be Catholic, and that's the end of that. So I would not say that that is one is more significant than the other, but that both are a product of the person who issued them and also of their times. Okay, so that's something. Now, what we see here is my text was talking a lot about Mary, Queen of Scots, and her execution led directly to the Spanish Armada. All right. So as far as that goes, I would not, I mean, now your text, remember that unless your text is something like this, that is written for the exam specifically, I would not put a lot of stock into, I read this in my text, that it needs to be something that's significant. Now, as far as that, the cause of the Spanish Armada, okay, Philip II had been married to Mary the First of England. Now, as far as that goes, whether Mary, Queen of Scots, yada, yada, I don't know. But Mary the First of England was married to Philip II of Spain. And so when Elizabeth took over as queen, now remember, Mary the First of England was a Catholic, and Elizabeth is deciding to rule as a Protestant. And so Philip proposes marriage to Elizabeth. Elizabeth's like, no. And then also Elizabeth is entrenching England as a Protestant country. So Philip believes that he's the rightful king of England because he had been married to Mary. So he saw, and of course the Pope issued a papal bull, which is a papal statement. The Pope issued this statement saying that Elizabeth is illegitimate, okay? That Elizabeth is illegitimate, that she can be challenged, okay? She can be challenged, and please, someone overthrow her. You have my permission. So Philip thought that he was doing the Lord's work. You know, with the Spanish Armada, he was going to go over there, he was going to land over there in England, and he was going to overthrow the English monarchy. But I would put this more in the context of the Reformation. Now, I'm not disputing your book. It sounds like you might actually know more about this than I do, but I would not say that there would need to be any kind of like, super complex explanation of the Spanish Armada in order to, when you've got the simpler explanation of that. Yeah, so I would say that yes, Philip was, and that's important for AP Euro to understand that Philip II was a Catholic zealot, okay? That he was somebody who definitely was a promoter of Catholicism, not only in Spain, but also in Europe. The Dutch revolt against Spain, a lot of that was driven by Philip II's, very Philip II's like very staunch advocacy for Catholicism and the way that he was persecuting Calvinists, and so that was something that the Dutch really wanted to kind of figure out a way to sort of have everybody coexist and not have this very vicious persecution that Philip wanted to see happen there in the Spanish Netherlands. All right. So did both of these edicts have an economic and societal impact in France? Now, I would say that Louis, basically with the Edict of Fontainebleau, that Louis told the Huguenots, kind of like what Ferdinand and Isabella told the Muslims and the Jews, that like you can either convert to Catholicism or you can get out of here. And so Louis the 14th did tell the Huguenots, you can either be Catholic or you can leave. So there actually were a fair amount of Huguenots who left France. Now, of course, I don't want to exaggerate those numbers because generally people don't leave France. That's the thing. France has less people that when you think about the United States, for example, there are very few people who trace their ancestry back to the French because the French just don't leave like other people do. So So I wouldn't put too much stock into that, but I would look at those as the religious policies of these monarchs. And I think that Louis was much more concerned about, like Henry IV was concerned about keeping the peace. Louis was concerned about having, everybody on the same page religiously, because that's how you build a nation state, is to have people who share common values. Okay, let's see, Nora. Your teacher has us write a summary of every paragraph. Okay, out of comb over DBQs, maybe once bi-weekly. Okay, how do I know what to study for the AP test? Not to. Okay, the thing is that if you're really into this, like, you can look up the AP European History course description, and that, if you're really wanting to know like what the exam is made of, AP Euro course description, I'll go ahead and put a link here. Okay, so Nora, if you're wondering what, because it sounds like you're putting a lot of effort into this, and I think you should. I think that's great. But I'm posting a link to this course description, and there's like an outline that'll basically kind of show what is the most important stuff here. So, for example, let me go into here and let me share my screen with you for a bit and just show you how to. I might recommend using this. So, for example, like if I look for Galileo, okay, Galileo's in here. Okay, Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton. Now it says here that possibly Andreas Vesalius could be something that's optional, but now we see William Harvey as somebody that we need to know. Now, if I were going to search for Kepler, okay, now there he is, Brahe. Now Tycho Brahe, not in there. Okay, so that does have some things there. Now Louis the 14th. Okay, Louis the 14th. You see here that he shows up there. So that's somebody that you would want to know. But there are going to be other people like. Okay, there's Diderot, so intellectuals such as Voltaire and Diderot, Locke and Rousseau. Okay, so we know that these people need to be studied. So Rousseau is important. Now, also, it's like, okay, these are some things that may be useful. Okay, so I mean, most people in the Enlightenment would teach Montesquieu and the spirit of the laws. So that is a great tool if you're really wondering, like, what is it that I need to focus on? What's going to be the most critical stuff for the exam? I was just doing some looking around. So I would just type in some of the material and thinking, what is going to, what's going to be important there. So I see there are different, Mary, most of it's primary, but if I put in Queen of Scots, okay, I don't see a single mention of Mary, Queen of Scots in the in the concept outline. So that's a great way to kind of separate the sheep from the goats, the wheat from the chaff, and that sort of thing. We're talking about studying specifically for the exam. All right, so then had the new, okay, now this is starting to sound like you're getting me to write your LEQ for you, Paul. Is that the case? But the nature of warfare, okay, now it starts to go really into like kind of a balance of power. Like if we think about this, the 30 Years' War, like really starts to redo, because if you think about it, like Philip II of Spain, the Spanish Armada, largely motivated by religion and the interest of European Catholicism. And so from there, you think about like when Gustavus Adolphus like invades the Holy Roman Empire. He's motivated by religion, but he also has some economic ties in the region as well. And so when Cardinal Richelieu is trying to figure out who am I going to side with, then it's really starting to be about balance of power considerations. And so, for example, if you look at the French in the American Revolution, the French monarchy did not really sympathize so much with the American patriots as much as they were fighting against Britain. And France had lost its North American colonies in the 7 Years' War, which we call in U.S. history the French and Indian War. So as far as that goes, then that is, then that's that. But the French really acted against their own interest. Okay, so Oh, okay, got it. Man, I just said no, Tom. I was like, whoa, whoa. Oh, okay, got it. Okay, excellent, excellent. Okay, so good to know that this sort of thing. But sometimes I look at the question, I'm like, is this a kid trying to ride an LEQ? All right, so good to know, Paul. Welcome. It's good to have some teachers in here asking questions. I think this might be about at least 20% teachers. So I would say here, like if you think about the French siding with the United States during the American Revolution, it also kind of goes into mercantilism, if you think about it, because mercantilism counted on colonies. And so, since mercantilism counted on having colonies, the British had made the French abandon their North American colonies as a result of the 7 Years' War. And so, going with that, you see where the French are like, you know what? We don't have our North American colonies. Britain's going to lose their North American colonies too. And of course, I think the French Revolution kind of makes people rethink that. Like, am I really going to get into a war just for the balance of power and to spite another country? The idea that if you could go into war in like the 17th and 18th centuries, if you could go into war to weaken your enemies, then it was okay if you lost a little bit too. So I think the French Revolution kind of shows that, just getting into a war so that your enemies are, are neutralized or whatever, not always the best thing unless you have like, if you don't have really a national interest motive there. But the thing is that if you think about it in terms of like a market economy and free trade and stuff like that, it's like, it doesn't matter as much. And that's starting to be what's coming around at the end of the 18th century, is this whole idea of like a liberal market economy. So as far as that, I think good question there. Good question. Good chance to think here. And so then what effect did the following wars have on French and British? Okay. So Spanish success. Okay. So the thing is, I would say that the most important of these wars would be the War of the Spanish Succession. Like the other two, like the 7 Years' War, I never even mention in AP Euro. I think that's really a lot more significant to U.S. history, but it will be in a textbook. But I don't know if it's necessarily like, if I scan this okay, so the 7 Years' War is seen as okay. So what we see here when I look in the concept outline, let me go ahead and share my screen again, just to kind of get into this here. So as far as that goes, the 7 Years' War is a possible thing to illustrate colonial conflicts and rivalries. So then you have the War of the Spanish Succession, which is the one that I would be most likely to look at there. Now the War of the Spanish Succession, I think, is important because it kind of goes into like Louis really is the short-sighted one, and the British are much more far-sighted because Louis thinking about, I want to put a Bourbon monarch on the Spanish throne. I don't want a Habsburg there. So Louis thinking about like, okay. And so the British are really thinking smarter about this, that the British are like, okay, Louis, you can have a Bourbon monarch on the Spanish throne as long as the houses can never be united. As long as we can't create one combined monarchy, that's fine. But let us have Gibraltar. And so the British still have Gibraltar. I mean, really, the British are the ones really thinking forward and thinking about the next phase of warfare, which is going to be like, I mean, they're like more than a century ahead, because you remember in the age of like the new imperialism, you start to see naval bases as being the biggest thing. Like, we need to have naval bases. So the British are really well set up there. It's like the Battle of Trafalgar. I mean, the British have that staging base right there at Gibraltar for that. So the British are really setting themselves up after the War of the Spanish Succession. They've got their eye on the future and of being a colonial power. So I think that that one, now the 7 Years' War, of course, that's going to be dealing with that colonial rivalry. But other than that, like the 7 Years' War, as far as being fought in Europe, I would focus just on that as a colonial rivalry, if you want to bring that in at all. The War of the Austrian Succession, I don't really go into at all. But then again, I'm kind of weak on Austria. So I think that it's important to kind of know where you're, it's like Dirty Harry said, man's got to know his limitations. And so that's one of those for me. But but then again, these wars that are being fought over succession and dynasties, that's really kind of one of those things as we see warfare changing, that's going to that's going to go away and yield to that more like balance of power kind of thing, which is what the British are thinking at the end of the War of the Spanish Succession. How can we basically get our little bit of the balance of power? All right, and were there any significant economic trends? And I'm going to answer these two questions we've got here and then call it a night. Were there any significant economic trends during the Protestant Reformation, or was money concentrated in building armies in most nations? Yeah, that would, gosh, I tell you what, Charlie, you had an interesting question, and now I'm just kind of stumped on this one. That the military now, as far as money concentrate on building armies in most nations, one thing I'll note is that before the age of absolutism, you declare war and then you raise an army. Okay, so the whole idea of like a peacetime standing army, because standing armies are expensive and they're prone to pillage when they're not told to and stuff like that. So typically, the idea of a large standing army is not something you're going to see in the era of the Reformation. It's like we're at war, now we need to raise an army, or we hire some mercenaries or something like that. So I would not say that building armies was a big priority there. It becomes a bigger priority during the age of absolutism. And then at what point was all right, so Italian Peninsula fully united. How was this done? And through domination or some other form of unity. All right, so Connor, this is actually like way out there because this is in the late 19th century, about the time of German unification. And so the Italian Peninsula was fully united in the late 19th century. And part of this was through warfare. Like there were some people who were, it goes through an earlier phase with Mazzini and romantic nationalism, but it ends up you start to see Garibaldi and that sort of thing that takes over, where there is a great amount of military conquest that is part of that as well. But there's also the foreign influence, because you had the Austrians who ruled a good part of northern Italy at that time still. So there was some resentment about the foreign domination, that a lot of Italy in that time before Italian unification was actually was actually being dominated by foreign powers. So that certainly was part of it. Impact of the Protestant Reformation. Good question. Good question. I think that's one of those things, Paul, that's like, it's funny because I've got, I'm known more for my European history, history content, but I'm much more of a US history guy. It's like I teach this course, but I'm not I guess I'm smarter than the average bear in European history, but when you get too far away from like what's there for a survey level course, I'm a little bit, it's like that's one of those that I'm not necessarily going to answer. Now, if you were talking to Chris Freiler or somebody like that, he could probably run in circles around me, and I'm totally fine to admit that. I tell you what, that would, Paul, after the exam, I think maybe that would be interesting. Now, Alternate History Hub is a great channel if you haven't looked at that before. Like that is a whole channel dedicated to like what if scenarios, and it's pretty cool. I watch them sometimes. So stuff like what if this country had won this war or something like that, or what if this had never happened or that. So that's a really good one. But yeah, maybe sometime after the exam we do a little bonus session or something like that. All right. Well, I tell you what, for having such a small group, this really was a great session. And we will be back on Wednesday and we'll figure out kind of what people are wanting to do there. But my guess is like on the calendar, let me see what we've got here on the calendar, that Okay, next time we are going to be focusing on constitutionalism. So we'll look at what's going on in Britain and the Dutch Republic. And then on the 24th, I've got the scientific revolution. All right, now I'm going to go eat dinner. And thank y'all so much for joining us this evening. And Charlie, hopefully I was able to answer your questions a little bit. But yeah, the one about the priest, I'm not going to touch that one. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, cheers. Thank y'all for coming. And I'll see y'all next week. It's always a pleasure.